Hi, my name's Pete Sabin, and tonight I would like to talk about two interrelated topics, namely peak oil and exponential population growth. I believe peak oil has actually now been mentioned in the mainstream media several times in the last 6 months, with oil prices spiking at $147 a barrel. I hope at least some viewers are now familiar with the concept. Back in the late 1940s, a senior geophysicist for Shell Oil named M. King Hubbert used his longtime experience working in the petroleum industry, where he combined physics, geology, and mathematics for the first time ever, applied these in a rigorous analysis to oil depletion in U.S. reserves. He first predicted that the oil age would be very short-lived. 1956, after refining his analysis, he predicted that U.S. production would peak in 1970 and thereafter would decline no matter how much additional drilling took place. He was laughed at by everyone in the industry. Things were booming. Texas was going like gangbusters. Well, folks, Hubbert was correct, because oil production peaked in the United States around 1972 and has declined from a one-time high of 9.5 million barrels a day to roughly 5 million barrels a day today. So what did Hubbert say exactly? Well, his basic assumption was quite simple, really. You find oil in an oil field, you start pumping it out of the ground. You can make some pretty amazing predictions about the general behavior of that oil field. For example, as you build more and more wells to pump more oil, the daily amount you get out of the ground will increase. Once you've pumped approximately half the oil for that particular oil field, the daily amount will then begin to decline. Even if you build a huge number of additional wells, it won't make any difference. Hubbert noticed if you plot a graph of oil production for a given field, that it follows a bell-shaped curve. Once production reaches the peak, it then begins to decline, and there's nothing that you can do to stop it. I have a graph that shows what I'm talking about. This particular graph shows U.S. production. It follows that bell-shaped curve, but it could just as easily show the whole world because the same principle applies. Of the approximately 30 nations in the world that have enough of a surplus to export oil, every single one is past peak and in decline of production, except for countries in the Middle East, most notably Iraq and Saudi Arabia. This means that we have pumped the most oil out of the ground per day that we will ever get. And from now on, that amount will decline no matter what we do. Right now, the world consumes 85 million barrels of oil a day. The USA uses 22 million of those. Geologists know there's a total recoverable reserve of 2 trillion barrels of conventional oil, and that we've used approximately 1 trillion of those, which is half. At our present consumption rates, the remaining 1 trillion barrels will be used up in 32 years. Now, this is misleading because the oil won't just keep coming out of the ground at 85 million barrels a day and then stop right at the end like turning off a faucet. Output will decline 5 to 8% a year during the next few decades. During that time, other countries will increase their demand for oil, most notably China and India. Since oil is literally used to make everything from plastics to medicine to pesticides, fertilizers, demand for oil is inelastic. That means that even if prices for oil go up very high, there will always be some demand for oil. People will drive less, but they're not really likely to eat less or use less medicine. By now you might be asking, what does all this mean? What it means in a nutshell is that our socioeconomic model, which is based on perpetual growth, is done. Growth takes energy, and oil is what our society uses to furnish that energy. There's no combination of renewables or nuclear or coal that will enable humans to replace the oil production as it declines. The reason for this is that oil is so energy rich and easily transportable that there is nothing like it. There's a thing called EROEI, and this means energy returned on energy invested. When oil was first discovered, you could get 100 units of energy from just 1 unit of energy input. As oil becomes scarcer, and we have to drill in inhospitable places like deep oceans, that ratio has dropped 8 to 1. When it reaches 1 to 1, oil will no longer be useful as an energy source at any price. Who would use more than 1 barrel of oil energy to get only 1 barrel out? No one. It doesn't make any sense. So where does that leave us? Well, we're in a crisis. Humans must acknowledge that we have to drastically cut our oil consumption, and fast. We need to save oil to power any kind of a transition to whatever is next. It is beyond the scope of my remarks today, but some simple things that come to mind that we could do to help alleviate our oil usage are 4-day work weeks, large investments in mass transit, truly effective tax incentives for residential solar, rethinking our city layouts by not having homes so far from work that people have to drive every single day. If we don't do these things, they're going to happen anyway due to oil depletion. Wouldn't it be more intelligent to be proactive and do it in a way that benefits everyone? Worldwide cooperation as oil production declines is really the only option in a world that has over 30,000 nuclear weapons. This brings me to exponential population growth. When I was a high school science student, we did an experiment with single-celled organisms in a petri dish full of sugar water. Under a microscope, we used an eyedropper to put one yeast cell in the dish. After this, we watched the 1 become 2 and the 2 become 4 and so on. Well, this is what's called exponential population growth. This also happens to be the pattern that humans follow. By about the 18th generation of yeast cells, the petri dish was half full of yeast cells. The sugar water was half gone. Well, on the 19th generation, the population of yeast cells doubled one last time, used all the remaining sugar water, and died out. This is roughly the same point that humans are at, with virtually every resource of note: oil, water, topsoil, fish stocks, forest, etc. Humans will use as many resources in the next 30 years as we have since the day the first man walked the earth. This clearly cannot continue. Our population will crash if we don't take steps to lower it in a controlled manner. A potentially palatable solution would be to find a way to empower women, because when women are equal in society, truly equal, birth rates drop to replacement levels immediately. We face tough choices as a species. Our house is full of material goods more important than having a clean and diverse biosphere for us to enjoy? Will we regret having used so much oil to build cheap plastic stuff in China when we don't have enough oil to power the farm tractors that feed us? Going back to that petri dish experiment, I leave you with one final question. Are humans smarter than yeast? My name is Pete Sabin, and this has been my commentary.